vitriol and the attitudes and just where we're at as a society. I will tell you something else that I believe about policing and the profession here. On one hand, I've had to deal with protests every week, and here lately almost every day. And that's not the Vacaville that I think most of us know. And it's not just limited to Vacaville. You're going to see it in Fairfield, and you're going to see it in Vallejo, more so in the larger cities. That said, in social media, and I think just the fact that everyone's pent up in this country, people aren't working the same, they're not attending schools the same. And this election has caused an absolute sense of anxiety towards what is wrong with America, and it was easy to point the finger at the police. I have strong feelings about that. I believe that no different than in your profession, there's good realtors and there's average realtors, and there's probably some people that you go, that was shady, and I'll just leave it at that. And you could say that about law enforcement as well. That was a terrible stop. Why did somebody stop me for that? The reality is we've had body-worn cameras on officers in Vacaville for 10 years. It's nothing new here. What you didn't know about Vacaville is I just got this today. Destination Zero, this is the Department of Justice, and at the national level, the City of Vacaville Police Department was awarded the National Officer Safety and Wellness Award for the entire nation. So when I'm faced with people who, thank you, when I'm faced with people who want to suggest that all police are racist and there's nothing redeemable about the local police department, I'm willing to sit down and have a dialogue. And I'm sure this is a conversation that happens in your life, in your social setting, and in your families. But the reality is there's never been a time where policing has been more professional. Now, I didn't say policing is perfect. I said there's never been a time when policing has been more professional, and there is a process. And it is our hope. I've been working with our city manager and the council to really engage our community, because the values of our community are important, and even those who are wanting to protest. But I absolutely will tell you that the men and women that serve our community, and I will also speak for the other agencies that I'm in partnership with, are doing our very best to look at how can we be better? How can we constantly make this a better place? And I'll share this with you because the real value in that is, from a city government perspective, the value add is so that this is a place where people can thrive. It's where people want to come to Solano County and raise a family, start a business. And so that is the value add of a police department. At the root level, you want to feel safe. You want you and your family and your children to feel safe. And so that is the service that our goal is to provide, and to do it in partnership with you. So here we are, we're struggling through COVID, we're struggling through a crisis in policing, and yet at the end of the day, this pandemic will pass, and policing is only going to continue to get more professional. And the reality is we have to stay rooted and the foundation of the fabric of a community is what I believe that I'm going to be personal to Vacaville, because I've called it home for over 31 years. But Solano County in general serves a real purpose in Northern California. And again, to receive these kinds of accolades at the national level says, the best practices in policing is the value that can create greater value in a community, so that our local government can provide the services, so that you can be successful and trying to bring in those who are looking to call Solano County and Vacaville home. At the same time, to provide that safety, because I'm sure you're going to get people who are going to say, was this neighborhood safe or is that neighborhood safe? How many of you get that? Pretty much. So I don't have it out yet, but I can tell you that we have a new computer-aided dispatch system. So part of our growth here in Vacaville, we're probably around 103,000 people now, is focusing on delivering the communication services for police and fire. And what we're working in in this arena this year significantly is completely replacing our system, our dispatch system. And we also just went through a dispatch upgrade that we can actually be prepared for growth. And so we have state-of-the-art systems here in Vacaville for radio communication, CAD systems, and you will get real soon, and I'll make sure it gets to your group, a link that you can go in and you can actually search typical crime data, whether it's weekly or monthly, and kind of see the trends and hotspots within our community. And you're also going to see the same thing in Fairfield, Sassoon, Vallejo, because we're all on the same system now. And that's been part of my desire and strategy is to try and get the cities within Solano County to be on the same radio system, the same CAD system, so that what we're really doing is we're creating a more regional approach to public safety, and we're working closer together in providing that level of service that's more consistent. So you're not just going to see it one way in Fairfield and a different way in Vacaville. There's a lot of unity when it comes to that these days. And I'm going to make sure I leave some time for questions, but I think it would only be important to share something else that we're doing that is very, very unique to Vacaville. You know, security cameras are something that I think everyone is getting into these days, whether you've got a Ring camera, whether you've got Nest, the networks that are available for residents, businesses, but also for cities. And so while we may not have been the first city to truly have a network of cameras that provide public safety, I will tell you that the one thing that we embarked on in the last few years, and especially this year, is a camera system that is along the I-80 corridor and also the ring of the city. I can assure you that, you know, in this era of people not wanting to have Big Brother looking at them, they are license plate recognition, and we had to go to council and we have to report out on this so that we're not, there's an ethical use of digital technology. But it is solving homicides in other cities because of people who are driving into Vacaville, and we're being able to identify people and assisting in the entire Bay Area. We had just, if you're very well aware of, we had a jewelry store heist that occurred, and a woman was stabbed in the premium outlets. Well, thankfully from our camera system, we now have him in custody. So it's a great investment. It's not even an investment based upon taxpayer dollars. It's a development impact fee growth funding that has helped us to do that. But we're also partnering with a company called Flock Safety. And the reason why that's important, and I want you to be aware of it, is while we have cameras on every officer and in every car and in the perimeters of the city and along the corridor that can capture license plate recognition, I partnered with Flock last year because they can actually create in business districts, so you have a business complex or like homeowners associations, to actually put up cameras that are day-night, that are license plate recognition, and can partner with public safety so that feed goes to the local police department and we can share and provide crime information. It's highly controlled, but that's open to public entities such as businesses and private enterprises and private neighborhoods, where people say, I want to put a couple of these cameras up, and it's all hands off, they take care of it. And the first week that it was partnered here in Vacaville, it literally paid for itself for an entire year in 1 week from the crimes that it solved. So from a perspective of, if you haven't seen what Flock Safety is, I encourage you to go online and look at them, and just know that your communities here in Solano County are partnering with them, trying to provide a better level of safety. Because what we see is these groups coming from the Bay Area and also from Sacramento, and they come along the corridor and they look at communities in Solano County and say, well, let's go into these neighborhoods and let's burglarize mostly cars. Homes are becoming less because of the way the laws have changed. But what we're trying to do is in partnership is provide that sense of safety. So if you get the question, is this a high crime area? You could be deep within Fairfield or Vacaville or any other community. And what you have is you have an apathy for criminal behavior that could occur in San Francisco, and yet they will in droves come through Solano County and decide in one night to go hit 15, 20 residential neighborhoods and have nothing to do with who lives here locally. And then lastly, I want to touch on just what I think is the violent crime issue that we're all struggling with right now. Is the capacity of the county jail was reduced to about 1/4 of its capacity because of COVID. Over 25,000 inmates were released from the state prison system because of COVID and early release. And a lot of the legislation that has occurred in the last 10 years has really changed the behavior of consequences. And what that means is you begin to see an increase in these, what would be considered petty crimes, but we're also seeing that increase in gang activity. Here in Vacaville, we stood up a gang unit a year ago and to focus on that type of behavior between gangs and just how they're behaving in our community. And we are taking a hands-on approach, all of our agencies in the county, and working at both the state level and the federal level to try and ensure that they don't have a stronghold. There's no doubt we hear the stories in Vallejo and Fairfield where there's a lot of gang activity. All of our cities are probably taking guns off the street nightly. And I don't say that to scare you. I just say that there is not a lot of consequences for the violent crime that's occurring in California across the board right now. Until I think 2 weeks ago, there had not been a single trial in Solano County since COVID started because of COVID. And so if you can't hold anyone accountable for violent crime, you end up with a backlog in the courts. I'll leave you with that. I want to respect your time. I want to open it up if there's any specific questions that I can answer, but I really do appreciate all the work that you all do. I do believe that knowing many of you that I do, there is such a great partnership with your industry in the county and within our communities. And we're asked a lot of the same questions, and we're trying to create this atmosphere within our communities. And I can just honestly say you are a major part of that. You're out in the field all the time. I would just leave you with one advice. If you feel uncomfortable about something, whether it's an encounter with people or a business deal, don't hesitate to call local law enforcement and get some insight, whether it's a scam or suspicious activity. You find that we have actually been able to address those types of behaviors because of the willingness to reach out and say, hey, this was unusual, and I just want to run it by someone. So keep that in mind. Don't ever hesitate to call your local police department here in Solano County, and we're here to help you. So with that, I want to turn it back over to you. I'll answer any questions.
Great. We've got two questions, both about homeless.
Okay.
How is our town going about the homeless concern? Are the homeless, I assume, just rotating through cities? And just a little bit more on that. I know that at the last city council meeting, there was $100,000 spent because of a homeless fire that started by, I think it was Alamo Creek on the south side of town. What's Vacaville's response now? I know that they've done a lot of outreach.
Yeah, good question. And, the homeless issue in Vacaville and in Solano County isn't getting better. It's getting worse. As you all know, the vacancy rate for rentals and ownership is making it more and more difficult for those who are precariously housed. In Vacaville, I'm going to say that our numbers are under 100. And, that's up from what it was a few years ago. But given the circumstances, I think, between Fairfield and Vallejo combined, they're probably somewhere around 1,500 between those two cities combined to our 100. So the outreach is really important, but it's really a lack of services and a lack of housing. And that's one of the areas that our council is trying to address. And it's not hard to see some of the political discussions that have occurred at the county level and at the city level trying to address this. I will tell you, if you are having a problem with somebody who is experiencing homelessness, please call. There was another fire that also occurred on the north side of Vacaville that caused damage near a hotelier. And one of the concerns that I had was the complaint that they're homeless are everywhere there. And I looked at our records, and there were no calls. And I said, I realize it seems like you don't want to be that nuisance to call, but if you have property and there is a challenge with homeless individuals, I can assure you, our community response unit is out every single day trying to provide resources, but with accountability. So if it means that we have to address private property issues and or public nuisance issues, to the fullest extent, we will. As a city, we have adopted policies and ordinances that allow us to focus on what the federal courts have said we can and can't do, and we'll take it all the way to the limit. When I say that, I mean if somebody is going to create an adverse condition that needs to be addressed, we'll address it. It doesn't mean that we're going to be inhumane about it, but when there are resources out there and people are turning it down, one particular story is there was two homeless individuals that received vouchers for housing, and it was turned down because the one bedroom wasn't what they wanted. They wanted the 2-bedroom, fully funded, fully furnished. So I say that in the sense that what we find is that there's a lot of people who do experience homelessness, and we're not naive to the fact that a lot of people want it on their terms, and that's the balance here. Is we will provide the resources with a hand up and not a handout. So I believe that that's one of the reasons why our numbers are what they are. Vacaville is a generous community, but you don't see people on the street corners panhandling. It doesn't mean that there's not people trying to help them. And we've done our best to try and coordinate that while the council continues to try to focus on low-income housing. So it's not something that's going to get solved overnight. Earlier this year, I was asked to go to Washington, D.C. and sit on a panel for HUD, trying to help them understand their programs are falling short, but it's also in conjunction to some of the California policies and the high costs that and the lack of housing that are exacerbating it. There really is it's a crisis. It's a health crisis, not just a housing crisis. So it's going to take more than just a magic wand to solve it. But to all of your needs, if there's somebody that's in need, we'll address it. Most people are aware of James Rippey. Anybody heard of James Rippey here in town?
Yep.
If you could imagine the amount of resources that we have expended on trying to help him, he's got traumatic brain injury, and he's legally blind. He's been hit in the streets. He's probably going to die on the streets. We've pushed for Laura's Law. We've pushed for conservatorship at the state level, at the legislative level. It's in kind of a beta test in San Francisco, but it's not here yet. And so we are at a place in society where we believe it's inhumane to tell someone what to do. And unfortunately, what you get is you get a lot more people living on the street in California. 1 out of every 2 unsheltered homeless in America is in California. And it's not because it's sunny, because it's sunny in Florida too. It's sunny in the South. It is based on a lot of policy that is really focusing on what's lacking in the healthcare industry for them, and also the unwillingness from a policy perspective on how to have consequences. So we'll continue to do it. I encourage you, if you have a problem, please call 449-5200 and we will address it. We have taken a hands-on approach and will continue to.
Great. Let's see. So you kind of talked about the heightened police security on June 1st. What do you see coming in the next couple of days?
Sure. June 1st was nothing like I've ever seen. It truly was an onslaught. I have, true story, I have prior military members that work in law enforcement here in the department. And I remember the days that followed June 1st, and then even declaring an emergency and having the National Guard here. It really helped save Vacaville, because while we may have seen a lot of damage and destruction in the Bay Area, on that particular week, we had intelligence that they were planning to come and destroy Vacaville. It wasn't just a possibility, it was part of the plan. And we prevented that. So fast forward to today is I get a lot of questions, shouldn't we be boarding up downtown? You weigh that, because I don't want you to lose your livelihood or to have a business that's destroyed or have a community that's destroyed, but I also don't want to instill a false fear. And we had a lot of activity this weekend, even so much as last night. But what we found is those who are demonstrating in their right to exercise a First Amendment right, and they're local, we have really analyzed and discovered that most people here don't want to see Vacaville destroyed. And so while there might be some tenseness, as long as you don't get hundreds of people drawn from outside, we're not likely to see a destruction. It is when you have a mass amount of people who come and have no connection to the community and believe there are no consequences, they will destroy. And we've made it very clear, if you're going to do something here, we will arrest you if you're going to come in and destroy it. And so where we've drawn the line is any act of violence or vandalism. And it doesn't mean it has to be reported. In the last few days, there's several incidents that we have seen on video that were unreported that we're going after. So it's a hands-on approach, but in a way that is not then trying to interfere with a First Amendment right to exercise free speech. Now imagine if you're me and you're being the target of a protest. It's hard to offer a space for freedom of expression, such as an employee strike, where we would somehow be trying to create a safe space. We become the target, so if we're overly present, that becomes the object of the reason why people become more aggressive and want to protest. So if you've ever heard the police were nowhere, I've heard it a lot over the summer, and I heard it a lot in the last few days. Make no mistake. If they say the police were nowhere, then we did our job, because we were everywhere. We were in all of these places, paying attention to all of the activity, just doing so in a way that does not fit the national approach, which is if you see groups standing out somewhere, put a bunch of police officers there and somehow they'll keep the peace. And what you end up with is what you see in a lot of large cities. You see almost a battle between a protest group and law enforcement, which is exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. With that, I will tell you that we are very much focused on just this heightened level of awareness of public safety, and there is going to be a lot more outreach. We're currently working on a focus group that is designed to engage the community on what it is that makes Vacaville Vacaville. And I know all the chiefs in Solano County are doing the same thing, so that we can address this unrest that we're seeing. But if there is arguments that the unrest is based upon a racist police department or a brutal police department, I can assure you that one of the things that I've been working with the council on is to put all the information out there and let the public be informed and be able to have a more educated approach versus an emotional approach. And that said, one of the key takeaways that I will share with you is I've often gotten the question is like, I'm afraid of you. Like, well, you're afraid of the authority and the emotional attachment that has been suggested that the police represents brutality. And it's the numbers just don't. It does not, it doesn't indicate that that's the fact at all, and so there's so much misinformation. But I can't take that away from anyone's individual experience. So part of our engagement this year is to have that real dialogue with the public. I can assure you we've always done that. The hard part is it's hard to do it during COVID because this is not the same personal environment.
Great. You kind of mentioned statistics, and one of the questions in the chat is, does Vacaville post police contact stats?
Yes. So two things on that. There is a transparency portal, and since May, June, we're beginning to add more and more information. In the state of California, so know that we're one nation, but we don't operate the same. In California, there's a lot of legal requirements that are far more advanced. So many of you probably saw early in all this, the 8 Can't Wait campaign. If you do all these things, it'll reduce the potential for a physical altercation with law enforcement and to reduce fatal incidents between law enforcement and the public. The truth is pretty much have been doing that for years. So it's promoted as if it's not. But you can go to the City of Vacaville website, and on their face page, on our face page, there is a link to a transparency portal. There's a lot of Q&A questions that as people have been asking, and even in some of these campaigns of reform, we have reviewed our own agency and then answered those questions. I did that in a town hall meeting, but also anytime we do that, we're adding that to our transparency portal. Our use of force here in Vacaville, it's a serious business. And one of the things I will tell you is every time force is used, it's recorded, it is documented, it's filmed, and it's investigated. So it's not as if there isn't a single incident or encounter that is not reviewed to determine whether or not it's within policy, whether training is necessary, and if there's something more to it that needs to be investigated, or if discipline needs to happen, then that would occur. State law requires those kinds of incidents be made public, and in the last 5 years, every agency in the state of California, as of this year, had to go back and report in the last 5 years all the fatal uses of force, and it's all public information. And so that's the one thing California has that the rest of the nation does not, is a higher level of transparency in making sure that it's being reported. And so that's also available on the city's website. So you can go there as well. It's the transparency portal that you can get from the main page. But I'll just say, in my career, I've never used force on a compliant person. One of the things that we have as a problem, more so today, when I've heard people say that, well, it was more violent 30 years ago. Well, I was a police officer here in Vacaville 30 years ago. It wasn't. What you actually had is you had more compliance. And what we face today is a questioning whether or not someone really needs to listen to the authority in the moment. And I'm always of the opinion, be polite, be respectful, and comply. And if for some reason you believe that the service is less than stellar, then complain. It's just like anything else in life. We will look into any type of complaint. We do it all the time. I have a division that's specifically professional standards and training. And we look into every situation. Very, very few situations are about use of force. Most of them are, many people don't believe that there was a valid reason for a stop. They don't, we broke a fence because we had to enter a building, and they think that we were wrong because we did it. So we investigate everything. But I'm going to throw this out there randomly and just say, raise your hand if I told you that we had 500 uses of force last year in Vacaville. If you think it was higher than that, raise your hand. How about 100? Higher. Okay. How about 50? Higher. Okay. We had 39. And the way the FBI looks at this is to say there's some things you can look at if you're an outlier, but the percentage of contacts and then those where force is used is way, way, way lower than the national average. And the one thing that I would leave you with is every single one of those is investigated to determine whether or not only was it reasonable, but was it necessary. Something else that I will share with you is the state of California has enacted laws, first in the nation, that say, here's when you can and cannot use force. And I'm a subject matter expert on it. And so over the last year, I sat in 2 summits, one for how to infuse de-escalation into the profession, more so than it already is, and also the requirement of the use of force. So both of those set the direction for all agencies and all officers in the state of California. And I sit on those subject matter expert panels as an expert. So we're very familiar with that here locally. This isn't new to us, but it certainly has sparked off a national debate.
We have a couple of more questions. And just on diffusing the use of force, I saw this in a movie once. You just go like this and you say, those aren't the droids you're looking for.
Right.
That worked. Okay, so being under so much scrutiny, I'm going to ask you 2 questions. Being under so much scrutiny, how is morale? And then number 2 is, if we have a listing where we have squatters, what's the best way to get those squatters out?
Sure. So morale is it's an interesting, a very interesting dynamic when you think of your workforce. Vacaville, just imagine that 80 to 90% of all of our staff live in town, raised families here, have kids. I mean, I've got grandkids here. So you focus on the relationships in a community, and that's different than when you see it from the big picture across the country. So when our staff turns on the news and they flip, through their phones, and what's being fed to them is very negative. It's instant and it's negative. And that's not the way we live in relationship. I wrote a letter to all of our staff. I do it on occasion, but this particular time was during the summer when I could really sense the pressure. I could see that there were staff that have thought about, it's called the Missouri effect. So if you've heard the Ferguson effect. Ferguson effect was really, it's a phenomenon that's hands-off policing, which isn't what we do here in Vacaville. But the Ferguson effect is people saying, I think I'm going to quit. I think it's time to go become a real estate agent, right? To do something else. Why do I want this? I'm going to do everything I possibly can. So I sense that there were really people who thought maybe I just ought to retire. I need to resign. And I reminded them of how much they're appreciated. You can't go anywhere in this town as a police officer without somebody have purchased a cup of coffee for you. Yeah, that person in the line ahead of you already took care of your coffee. The cards and letters and the food that has come to the police department. Jokingly, I told our staff, if you don't think that this community appreciates you, just check your waistline. You've never had so many items show up at the police department. Unbelievable. And then on top of that, you add all the fires and the response of just trying to save this community when the fires came down. So it's kind of a tough thing between the morale of knowing if you just shut off media and social media and the things that people are telling you on some calls. Because remember, police officers, they go to work, in some cases 25, 30 years every day, seeing people not on their best day and constantly being told how terrible they are. And it can get to them. We're human, we're people just like you. And I try to just remind them, you live in a community that cares. And don't forget that. And so as long as I can keep them off social media, we're doing okay, but make no mistake, this constant pressure, we're 5 months we're 8 months into COVID, but we're 5 months into being, told everything that's wrong with us. You take it personal, but it's hard not to. But we're hanging in there.
The second question was squatters. We've got squatters in our listings.
So our community response unit would be the best suited unit to address that. in the same way we're trying to address some of our homeless outreach and trying to assist businesses and residents with this. They're going to be the best suited to try and understand what are the best resources to getting a squatter removed legally. And then, from there, right now, Aaron Dahl is the sergeant that's in charge, but you could easily call 449-5200 and ask for the supervisor for our community response unit. That would be my recommendation to you. And that way you're going to get a personal interaction with a unit that's specifically designed to deal with quality of life issues such as this.
Okay.
You're not going to want to remove them yourself. There's a legal process.
Right. Okay, we are just about time. Thank you so much, Police Chief John Carley, for joining us today. We really appreciate it. You shared a lot of great information. So, hey, thank you.